Hey everyone, this is Antriksh for Enterprise DNA, and in this video I'm going to show you one of the problems that was recently posted on the Enterprise DNA forum. And what the user wants to do is, if there is a selection over the date column on the slicer, what they want to see is that they want to go back in time from that date in multiples of 7, or you can say in steps of 7. So if I have selected May 12, 2007 in the slicer, what they want to say is May 12th, then they want to see the date that was 7 days before that selected date, and they do not want to stop at that date and they want to continue and go on. So you can see that April 28th is exactly 7 days before the May 5th, and they want to see this result dynamically. So that means they want to create a what if parameter, and based on the selection they want to show those numbers of the dates in the matrix. So in this case, right now I have selected 6 dates, and what they want to be able to do is, if they make a selection over 3, they want the result to be limited to only 3 dates from the current date that is selected in the slicer. And if in case they select 20 dates, they want to show those 20 dates in the matrix. And if you want to follow along and download the files, what you can do is head over to the Enterprise DNA forum, and this is the link for that post that has been made by Hussein, and in the solution you can go and download the files that I have posted. So with that being said, let's get started, and I will show you how you can create a measure that will allow you to create a report like that we have discussed. Alright, now I'm back in Power BI, and the first thing that we need to do is create a what if parameter, and for that we can head over to the modeling tab and let's click on new parameter, and let's wait for it to open. So I can name the parameter as dates to show, or you can name whatever you want, and the minimum value would be 1 and the maximum can be 20 for this example. And I want the dates to be, the numbers to be in the increment of 1, and the default value would be 1. And yes, I want that field to be added to the slicer in the current page, and let's click on OK, and it will generate a new table. And what I want is, I want to show it as a list so that it is very convenient for us while selecting values. And let's increase the font of it a little bit so that it is visible. And that's it for setting up the report. The next important thing that we need to do is, we need to create a duplicated date table which would be used as a disconnected date table, and I will tell you why we need a disconnected date table for this kind of calculation. But before that, let's head over to the Power Query and let's create a duplicate date table. And I can create a duplicate and I can name it as dis date. So the dis basically means disconnected, and let's close and apply. And once it is loaded in the model, let's create a slicer with the date column from this disconnected date table, and let me just move things around. So let's open the disconnected date table, and I'm going to create a slicer using that. Let's use the list option, and I'm going to create a copy of this disconnected date table to show why we actually need the disconnected date table in the model in the first place. So in this slicer, I'm going to import the date column from my original date table. So the reason why we need a disconnected date table is that if I put a selection over the slicer that contains the column from this date table, which actually has a connection with the sales table, what would actually happen is that it would limit the number of rows that are visible in the matrix. So let's say if I select March 14, 2005, you can see that the only date, month and year visible in the matrix belongs to 2005 March 14th. So if we were to use this kind of setup, the result would never work. The measure that I have already shown you would actually will not work. The reason is that even before our measure actually starts to work, the axis of our matrix has already been filtered, and on those filtered value, I won't be able to generate the dates, the dates that I have to go back into the time. So what I need to do is, I need to create a setup of dates where if I put a selection over the slicer, that should not filter the matrix directly. So we would filter the matrix, but that filtering would come through the DAX code that we are going to write, and not directly from the slices. So if I put a selection over any date you can see that there is no change made in the matrix, and that is because the disconnected date table does not have any relationship with the dates table, and that's why it is not getting filtered. And that was the reason why we had to create a disconnected date table. And now what I can do is remove the slicer that contains the date column from the original date table, and then we can start writing our code. So let me just put it towards the right, and let's create our first measure. So the first measure would be basically, you can name it anything. I'm not going to name it right now. I do not have much fantasy of naming the stuff right now. So the first variable that we need to create is ValuesToShow, and it would basically retrieve the value that is selected from the column that is actually placed in the slicer from the what if parameter table. So I can write ValuesToShow is equal to, and then I need to open my square parentheses, and I'm going to select the measure date to show value, and let's try to return the value that is going to return. So I can write ValuesToShow, and let's drag that measure into the matrix, and you can see that since there is no selection made on that slicer, we only see 1. And if I select 6, you can see that now we see 6 in each row of that matrix, and if I change it to 14, we get 14. So this initial variable is working. Now we need to create another variable which basically would retrieve the disconnected date that is selected in the slicer. So let's write var disselected date, and that would be basically selected value over this date. And let's try to return what this variable is actually storing in itself, and let's confirm it. And you can see for each row I get January 12, 2005. So even for 2010 I get the same value. So this variable is also working. Next, what we need to create is from this date, the date that I've selected in the slicer, I want to create the list of dates in steps of 7, and while also ensuring that I generate either 6 or 14 days. Let's select 6 so that we do not generate a lot of dates. So I need to create a date table, or you can say list of dates, that will contain 6 dates that are starting from January 12, and then you can subtract 7 for each step that we take. And for that, before creating that in a measure, I want to show you that how we can do that in a calculated table. So let's create a new calculated table so that we can visualize how we are actually generating the dates internally inside our DAX code. So I can go to the data view or the model view and click on new table, and let's create a new table. So the first variable would be var selected date. So I'm just trying to mimic the scenario that we have actually seen in the report view. So the selected date is basically the ValuesToShow date measure that we have already seen. So I'm going to write selected date, and then I'm going to use the date function. So let's select the date, which is 5th May of 2007, and then I need to create a variable that will specify the number of dates that I want to show in the metric, and then I can write dates to show equal to 6. So I want to show 6 dates in that matrix, and let's create another variable that will generate the list of dates in step of 7. So let's name it as date list, and that would be basically a generate series, because generate series is one of those functions that can actually generate a list of numbers by passing in several arguments. So the first argument would be start value, but the problem here is that we want to go back in time, not forward in time. So we will have to do some mathematical calculation so that we can retrieve the end date from the selected date. So selected date is 5th of May. I want to go back, let's say you can say 7 times 6, 42 days in the past. So first of all, I need to specify the start date, which would be selected date, and then I need to subtract those 42 days from the selected date. So for that I can write dates to show, which basically contains 6, and then I can multiply it by 7, And then in the next argument, I'm going to specify selected date once again. So this will be 42 days back in time. This is the current date, and let's create the dates in a step of 7. So let's close generate series and try to see what it actually returns. So I can write return and date list. So you can see that the result of generate series contains 7 values. So it starts from 5th May, it goes back in increment of 7. So it actually is creating the dates that we actually need, but it is creating one too many dates. So if I go back to the report that I've originally showed you, so you can see that upon placing a selection over May 5th, the last date that we need to show is May 31st. So how we can make a change in our code? So what we can do is simply either use 5 or use -1. So you can imagine that in the measure that we are going to write, 6 would be replaced by the dates to show measure, and then we can simply subtract 1 from that. And if I click out of the DAX code, you can see that we have received 6 values. So it starts as 5th of May and ends at 31st of May. Now we are going to use these dates and inject those dates into filter context, and in that filter context we are going to calculate the sales amount. So what I can do is simply copy this code, go back to my measure, and let's expand it, and let's zoom in a little bit. And what we can do is start writing our code. So I can write var, let me just paste in the code that I've copied, and I can create a new variable var dates to show. So it will contain all the dates that we have already seen, and in this case I need to replace it with disconnected selected date, and dates to show should be replaced with values to show. And now we need to create final variable which would be result. So let's write result, and that would be basically calculate over total sales. And then I'm going to inject all the dates that we have received from the generate series into the filter context, and let's return result and see what it actually returns. So you can see that we are not actually getting the result that we have requested from the DAX code that we have written. So what is the problem? So first of all, let's put a selection over the slicer which already is there. So, and also bring the total sales measure into the matrix. So you can see that the code is actually not working. It is returning the sales amount itself. So the problem with the measure is that this date that we have created has a data lineage with the disconnected date table, and that date table is not actually connected to the sales table. So that's why when we apply those list of dates into the filter context, the filter context is not actually able to filter the sales table. So how can we fix the DAX code? So if you are aware, there is an excellent function for creating virtual relationships or applying the filter context. It is known as TREATAS. So what we can do is treat those values that we have received from the generate series as if they were actually the part of the date table, the original date table, or you can say we are basically building a lineage with the date column of the date table that we already have in the data model. So what we can do is write TREATAS, and in the first argument we have to provide the column or the table that doesn't have the relationship or the data lineage, and in the subsequent arguments we need to provide the columns to which we want to map the lineage of the column that or the table that we have provided in the first argument. And in this case I want it to map it against the date column, and I can close that, and let's confirm the measure and see what it returns. So now the measure is not working once again. So let's see what is actually happening. So if I go to the May 5th, it doesn't work. So let's see what is actually happening. Okay, so I was able to figure out why the measure is actually not working. So the reason is that I had a selection over May 5th, 2005, while in this dataset the sales only occurred between 2007 and 2009. So what I need to do is make sure that the selection of the slicer is correct and is on the correct date. And before that, let me just limit the number of items that we are actually seeing in the slicer so that I do not have to scroll a lot. And I can bring the calendar year number column in the filters pane and limit the year to be 2007. So let's do that. Let's minimize the filter pane. And right now you can see that nothing is visible in the measure field. And if I make a selection over May 5th, so let me just find May 5th, you can see that we get some value, but that doesn't appears to be the correct one because it is repeating itself again and again for all the months and all the years. So why is it not working? And the answer lies in the way that we have written the code. So after injecting the filter in the filter context using TREATAS and mapping the data lineage with the dates column, what actually happens is that TREATAS is going to apply all those values into the filter context, and calculate is going to override the existing filter context. So let's say if I am at May 5th and in this cell the filter context is May 5th, May and 2007. So what calculate is actually doing is it is overwriting the filter context that is at May 5th with all those values that has been retrieved from the generate series function. So how can we make sure that we inject the filter into the filter context, but we do not actually override the existing filter context? So think about it, pause the video and think how you can do it. So once you are done, you can resume back. And the way we can ensure that we do not override the filter context is by using the function keep filters. So let's write keep filters and let's close keep filters. So right now the value that is being shown at each cell is 41,646, and let's confirm the measure so to see if that is the same value that is being shown at the grand total as well once we write keep filters. So let's click outside of the matrix and let's go back one level, and you can see that the grand total is now the exact same value that we were seeing earlier. And let me just format the measure so that it looks much more readable. So 34,000 plus 7 plus 200 would sum up to be somewhere around 41,646. And if I expand May, you can see that on 5th May we get the exact sales amount, and similarly we should get on the April 28th, April 21st, April 14th and 7th, and so on and so forth. So if I now remove the total sales measure from the matrix, you can see that upon selecting 6, what I get is 2 plus 2, I get 6 values. If I select 7, I get 4, 3, 7 values. So when I was initially working on this solution, after creating the measure, what I did was I gave the solution to Hussein and he accepted that solution. But one of the enterprise DNA expert, Harsh, reached out to me and he told me that upon selecting 7 or 8, the result is not actually changing. So he asked me why is that, and that got me thinking that there is something wrong with the code. So the issue is that on some days in the dates table, there is no matching transaction in the sales table. So that is why the measure is actually returning blank for those dates. And since it is returning blank, the code that actually runs behind a matrix or any kind of visual, which generally is summarize column, what it does is it actually removes the blank rows from the result that it returns to the Power BI, and then Power BI uses that result to actually populate the matrix. So since some of the days are actually returning blank, we are not seeing any sales for those, and we do not actually see the entry for those dates in the matrix. So if in case you want to show something for those days where you do not have any sales in your data model, if you want to do that, let's see how we can achieve that. But before that, let me just show you that if I select 9, you can see that between 10th March and 24th March, we are missing at least 2 dates. So I think it is 17th. We are just missing 1 day. So we need to bring back March 17th somehow and show at least something in that place, because there is no sales made for that day. So let's see how we can do that. And the first thing that we need to do is go back to the measure and remove the calculate part, because the way we are going to write the result variable is very different from the way we have already written it. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create the data lineage. So I can write TREATAS dates to show, and then I can write dates date. Then I need to check all those dates that are being returned by the TREATAS are actually included in the filter context. So for that I can split this execution into multiple variables. So I can write create data lineage to show that it stores the TREATAS, the result of TREATAS. Then I can create another variable which will hold all those dates that are visible in the filter context that is coming from the matrix. So I can write visible dates. Then let's write values dates date. The next thing that we need to do is create a column over the result of the TREATAS that would contain the sales amount. So I can write var dates with sales. So I can write add columns, create data lineage, and in that I'm going to create a new column which would basically be sales amount, and that would basically be the usage of total sales measure in the row context, so that we are actually initiating the context transition. And the next variable would basically check all those dates that are stored in the add columns variable, are they actually included in the filter context or not. So I can write var is date in filter context. You can name it as any way you want. So I can write filter, and I need to access the table that I've already created. So it would be dates with sales, and from this table I need to check that the date contained in the dates with sales table, is it included in the visible date variable. So I can write date in visible date. So it will filter out all those dates that are actually included in the filter context. The last part is basically result, and we are going to write sumx over the is date in filter context, and I need to write sales amount from the column that we have already created, the virtual column. And what I need to do in this case is I need to add a 0, and that would actually include that day that was not previously included. So let's return result and confirm the measure. And now you can see that March 17th has now come back into the report. So we are now able to see March 17th. In this case, we are actually showing 0, but based on your requirement, you can show anything you want. So if I select 7th, you can see that the result is limited till March 24th. And if I select 8, the March 17 is also included. So now 7th and 8th are showing different result. So that's how with the help of Harsh, I was able to build a measure that now starts including all those dates that do not have any transaction in the fact table. So before I wrap up, let me just show you what would actually would have happened if I would have used the addition of 0 on the original measure that we had created. So let's just go back to the original state. So let's press some Control and Z. So we are now back at the original state. So let's think like a beginner. So initially when I was also creating the measure, I actually thought let's just add 0 without even thinking how it could actually impact the matrix. So let's put 0 in here and see what it would actually return. So you can see that upon adding 0 to the result returned by calculate, we are seeing 0 at each cell of that matrix, and that is certainly not what we actually want. So what is actually happening? So the issue is that the result variable can either contain blank or it can contain a sales amount. But when you add 0, you are actually replacing that blank with 0. And I have already told you that summarize columns removes the blank rows from the dataset. It returns to the Power BI so that Power BI can only show limited rows and not the blanks. But since we have added 0, summarize column is being forced to keep those rows, and then it returns a table that contains all the dates that exist in the dates table, and it shows 0 wherever it is applicable. Wherever it was actually blank, it shows 0, and for the dates where we have sales, it shows the sales amount. So that is why I had to rewrite the measure in a way that I am only adding 0 for those dates that are actually visible in the filter context, and all are actually also included in the dates to show variable. So that's why I had to create a different kind of algorithm to tackle this kind of scenario. So that was all for this video, and if you have any questions for me, just let me know in the comments section. And if you want to follow along, feel free to go to the Enterprise DNA forum, download the file, and if you are a forum member, just comment on that post. So let me know if you have any questions, and I will try to answer your questions in the forum. And if you are not a forum member, make sure that you subscribe, and otherwise you can post your comments in the comments section. And until then, have a great day. I will see you the next time.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website. Plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.